Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I hope you're having a good week so far. We're early in the week, but hopefully nothing too crazy has happened. You survived your Monday. You're chugging along. I tried to say chugging and trucking at the same time. It didn't work. Hopefully you're trucking right along through your Tuesday, and the week is going well. So it is Tuesday, and I did an episode a couple episodes back about Joan Aiken, who was one of my favorite childhood authors. And before that, I did my love letter to Little House. So I'm kind of on this nostalgic books I read as a child kick. And that led me to think about more books that I read, not only as a child, but also as an adult. Books that I read with my parents. In this case, again, my dad got me into Joan Aiken. And now today I want to talk about Roald Dahl. And Roald Dahl, if you don't know his name, I'm sure you've heard of his books, at least because many of them have been made into movies. James and the Giant Peach, the BFG, which stands for Big Friendly Giant, Matilda, and of course Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which was made into a couple of movies, one starring Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka, and then Johnny Depp as a very strange Tim Burtonized Willy Wonka. But both of those have been made into a movie. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory had a sequel, which was Charlie and I think it's the Great Glass Elevator. I don't think it's the Big Glass Elevator. It's the Great Glass Elevator, right? Anyway, so Roald Dahl his brain had to have been an interesting place, because his books have kind of a maybe a dark, maybe a little bit twisted sense of humor. And I don't know, it's kind of like when you watch Disney movies and a lot of the humor goes over the kids' heads, but the adults get it. I think Roald Dahl's books are kind of like that, because there's some things that when I read them as adults, I'm like, oh, as an adult, I think, oh, I don't know that I would have gotten that when I read it as a child, or if I read it as a child. Interesting. So he had an interesting sense of humor. He was also a very interesting man. Before we talk about him, I think I mentioned when we did the book chat with Stacy about when we were talking about Harry Potter, that one of the reasons that I started reading Harry Potter was because before I'd heard of the series before everything kind of got all crazy with everyone loving them. I worked at the library on campus, and when I was in college, and found the first or second one. I don't even remember which one it was, and maybe the uproar had started. I just hadn't heard about it, but it was before I heard of the Harry Potter uproar. And I picked up the book, and it's the chapter with the mandrake, where they're pulling the baby out by it's the baby, but the roots are coming out of its head. And I thought, that reminds me of Roald Dahl. Now, the illustrations, the person that illustrated Harry Potter, whose name I am blanking on, don't look like the illustrations necessarily it's not the same style of drawing, and the illustrator for a lot of Roald Dahl's books was Quentin Blake, but it was just kind of, it wasn't the style, it was just the imagery. So, how often do you open up a book and see a baby with roots for hair being pulled out of soil? It reminded me of Roald Dahl, and I thought, you know what? I need to read this. This looks like something that I need to read. So I put it on hold, and as soon as it became available, I ignored my homework and read the first Harry Potter book and then the second Harry Potter book, and I was addicted. But I might not have read Harry Potter if it hadn't been for Roald Dahl. I probably would have, but I might not have. So Roald Dahl, like Joan Aiken, was quite the interesting person, also British. But Roald Dahl, according to his biography on his website, which is RoaldDahl.com, easy enough. It's the official Roald Dahl website, although he is no longer living. He was a spy, an ace fighter pilot, a chocolate historian, and a medical inventor. He was also the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, the BFG, and a treasury of original, evergreen, and beloved children's books. He remains, for many, the world's #1 storyteller. So he was born in Wales in 1916 to Norwegian parents. Oh, interesting. Harold and Sophie. So he was, that's interesting. So he was born in Wales to Norwegian parents. Okay. So he was named after Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian who had been the first man to reach the South Pole just 4 years earlier. So his biography says he had a heroic start in life, but his early years were blighted by the tragic deaths of his older sister Astrid and his father. So his mother sent him to boarding school, and he had apparently many bizarre and memorable events that would later be recounted in Boys. Pupils at Repton were invited to trial chocolate bars, a memory that stayed with Dahl throughout his life, inspiring Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. School days happily behind him, Dahl's lust for travel took him first to Canada, then to East Africa, where he worked for an oil company until the outbreak of World War II. He enlisted in the Royal Air Force at 23. In September 1940, Dahl received severe injuries to his head, nose, and back when his Gladiator crash-landed in the western desert. After 6 months recovering from his injuries in Alexandria, he returned to action, taking part in the Battle of Athens. Later, after a posting to Washington, he supplied intelligence to MI6. Why hasn't anyone done a movie about this man? He married in 1953 he got married to American actress Patricia Neal. They had 5 children. They did divorce after 30 years. And he married Felicity Crossland. So anyway, amazing. So he really was amazing. And then, he also started writing. He had success on television. He had already had his stories told in 6 episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which is pretty amazing. And then some of the other books that you may have heard of, the Twits, the Witches, the Minpins. He wrote a lot, and he wrote some really amazing things. So that's what I want to talk about today. Not only obviously he had a pretty impressive life, and then he went on to write some really hilarious and sometimes dark books, which I suppose can be, understood considering he had a pretty impressive life, but it was not necessarily an easy life. That's just a little bit of an introduction to Roald Dahl and to why I love Roald Dahl and Harry Potter. So when I was younger, I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the Big Glass, the Elevator. Why can't I talk today? Seriously. I don't know, you guys. I think I need a nap. So I read those and I loved those. The movie scared the snot out of me. I was not a fan of the movie, mostly because of the scene in the tunnel where, what is going on? Are they like murdering chickens or something? I don't know. I couldn't watch it as a kid. I should rewatch it as an adult. I've seen most of it as an adult, but I can't remember that scene in the tunnel. I probably should rewatch it just to make sure that I actually know what I can figure out what I thought was so creepy in that scene. Let me know. Is it creepy? Is it not creepy? Although I do love Gene Wilder, and he was awesome in that role. I think we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to see if I can come back and speak in full sentences, and we'll talk more about Roald Dahl and some of his books. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Today I am speaking about author Roald Dahl, one of my favorites from childhood and still one of my favorites in adulthood, frankly. And as with Joan Aiken, his website is fascinating. So if you have some time and you like to get sucked down author rabbit holes, you should definitely check it out. I just learned something interesting about him that I had not known before. So I mentioned from his biography that he did some writing for television, having things featured on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. But when I went to his books or his stories, and they're alphabetical, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang came up, and I thought, wait a minute, he didn't write that, did he? Well, yes and no. As you know, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is a musical film, and it's an adaptation that's loosely based on Ian Fleming's children's book of the same name. So Ian Fleming, wrote James Bond, also apparently wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but Roald Dahl is the one who adapted it for film. So he wrote the screenplay. He also worked on James Bond's film, the James Bond film You Only Live Twice, and he also got the idea for a short story, Lamb to the Slaughter, from an idea that Fleming had given Roald. Wow. So Ian Fleming and Roald Dahl working together, making crazy magic. That's fascinating. You might have known that. So I was going to talk a little bit about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because probably that's his, maybe his most well-known book. Maybe not. Although the website does say is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is perhaps Roald Dahl's best-known story. The story, of course, of Charlie Bucket, the 5 golden tickets, the Oompa Loompas, and the amazing Mr. Willy Wonka. So it was first published in 1964. Conservative estimates suggest the original book has sold over 20 million copies worldwide, and it's now available in 55 languages. Awesome. So Dahl began working on this book in 1961 after finishing James and the Giant Peach. But its origin, as we heard in his biography, can be traced all the way back to his childhood. In the book Boy, he tells us how, while at school in England, he and his fellow Repton students were engaged as taste testers for a chocolate company. I want to go to private school and be a taste tester. I don't want to go to a boys' private school in England in the 30s or whatever years he would have done that, because hazing. And I'm not a boy. Anyway, so they were taste testers for a chocolate company, which is something that seems to have started him thinking about chocolate factories and inventing rooms long before Mr. Wonka was on the scene. But when he came to write Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the story went through several drafts. For example, at first, Charlie was one of 10 children to enter the factory. Roald Dahl redrafted 3 or 4 times until the story, as we know it, was released in 1964. And so since its release, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which Roald dedicated to his son Theo, has proven to be one of the most enduring children's books of all time. The story has reached all corners of the world and even unearthed a real-life Willy Wonka who sent him a letter in 1971. He was the one that wrote the screenplay for the film release, which of course starred Gene Wilder, so that's cool. It was a process that came with some difficulties, but the film did go on to become a classic, and it's now got some really iconic scenes in it. And then, of course, Tim Burton released his own adaptation, and now we have, we just don't even think Willy Wonka is such a iconic character. And, there's the candy. There's Willy Wonka candy that we see in stores, and it's such a part of our everyday lexicon anymore. It's amazing. So in 2014, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory celebrated its 50th anniversary, which is awesome. So that's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Maybe slightly less well known is probably Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. That was released in 1972, so 8 years after Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And just a brief description of that. Willy Wonka has asked Charlie and the rest of the Bucket family to live with him. Now, moments after Charlie and the Chocolate Factory ended, we rejoin the adventure as the Great Glass Elevator blasts into outer space. I remember going from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as a kid and reading the Great Glass Elevator, and it was blasting into outer space, and I thought, wait, what did I miss? But like I said, published in 1972, continues their story. And I love this. It says, at first, Roald Dahl thought the word elevator was too American, but the British word lift seemed too boring. Air machine was considered, but elevator came out top in the end. Although it is called a lift in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie and the Great Glass Lift doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Charlie and the Great Glass Air Machine sounds confusing. I'm going to go with Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. I think they did a nice job on that. Good job. So what is your favorite Roald Dahl book, if you have a favorite? Or if you've never read them, you should definitely read them. Did you know that he also wrote The Fantastic Mr. Fox? That should give you an idea of his sense of humor. If you have seen that movie, that is one movie I didn't really care for. I have not read the book, so I don't know how the book compares to the movie. But maybe you've seen that movie and loved it. So that would be cool. If you haven't read Roald Dahl, maybe you want to jump in there. It's amazing how many of his books have been made into movies. He also wrote a book of ghost stories, which sounds very fun. He wrote a ton. He wrote not only children's books, but he wrote some adult books as well. Boy sounds more like a memoir, of course. He had such a fabulous, crazy, like I said, slightly twisted sense of humor. And I wonder what his personality was like in real life if he was like that. There's Matilda, of course, and Matilda's parents were horrible. You've maybe seen the movie on that one of my favorites from the 90s. And but a wonderful book as well, and really, really gives Matilda a lot of agency. That actually came out in 1988, which is amazing. And I for some reason thought it was older, but it was, it also won the Children's Book Award shortly after it was published in 1988. And then of course it was made into a film in 1996. So that's new to me. Oh, and this is new to me as well. In 2010, the Royal Shakespeare Company's production of Matilda the Musical. 2010. Had I heard that? Maybe. But now I know for sure. Musical Matilda. Awesome. So that is about Matilda Wormwood, who is only 5 years old, but she is a genius. Unfortunately, her parents are too stupid to even notice. Worse, her horrible headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, is a bully who makes her life difficult. But Matilda's teacher, Miss Honey, and her friends... Miss Trunchbull makes life difficult for Matilda's teacher, Miss Honey, and her friends. But what Miss Trunchbull doesn't know is that Matilda has a trick or two up her sleeve, and she, as you know, is a bit of magic up her sleeve, which is, she has parents that are awful, but she finds her own agency. He really did write some great books to give confidence. He wrote a book called Revolting Rhymes, which that's just awesome. Sorry. Oh my gosh, he wrote a book, this is new to me, called Switch Bitch. I'm thinking that's an adult book. Wow. Wow. I had no idea. 4 tales of seduction and suspense from the Grand Master of the short story. Roald Dahl bad word in the title. Who knew? You probably knew. I'm just down a rabbit hole again. Wow. I had no idea. Okay, so I am once again in awe and fascinated by one of my favorite authors about whom I learned so much looking through the website for this podcast, about whom I keep learning because as I go back to the website and start clicking around while I'm talking to you, I'm like, holy cow, there's the B word, Roald Dahl. Okay, so if you have any interest in Roald Dahl, if you've never heard of him, you should definitely check out his website and definitely read some of his books. If you already knew Roald Dahl, but you didn't know some of this stuff like I didn't know, you should definitely check out his website. I'm going to definitely read some more books. And if you already knew all this stuff and you're like, geez, you're really not a Roald Dahl fan, you'd probably be right. I mean, I am not all-knowing when it comes to Roald Dahl. That is for certain. I never claimed to be an expert, but now, interesting, fascinating, and we're going to take another quick break. So when we come back, I want to talk to you about my favorite Roald Dahl book ever. Maybe one of his lesser well-known books. Most people that I talk to have never heard of it. So there's a little teaser for you. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, where I am talking about, gushing about, fangirling about, again, one of my favorite childhood authors, this time Roald Dahl. And I said when we came back, I would tell you about my favorite book by him. And as I said, most people that I talk to have never heard of this particular book. It is a shorter story, not a full-length novel. It's never been made into a movie as far as I know. And those of you who are definite, major fans and who have already known most of what I've told you will probably continue yelling at your headset or whatever you're listening to this podcast on as to how I don't know anything. But my favorite book by this man, this wonderful author that I love so much, is The Vicar of Nibbleswick. Have you read it? It is fabulous. If you haven't read it, please, please do. It makes me laugh even thinking about it. So, The Vicar of Nibbleswick, again, one of my favorites. It was written in 1991, so in the last years of Dahl's life, actually. And it was in aid of the Dyslexia Institute, which makes me appreciate it even more. It tells the tale of Robert Lee, who, having suffered with severe dyslexia as a boy, successfully overcame his problems with the help of the Dyslexia Institute. But soon after arriving in Nibbleswick as the town's new reverend, he develops a very unusual condition the local doctor calls back-to-front dyslexia. So as I said, this was written in 1991, or it was published in 1991, shortly after Dahl's death in November of 1990. As his principal illustrator Quentin Blake reveals in a footnote published at the end of the story, Roald auctioned all rights to The Vicar of Nibbleswick to benefit the Dyslexia Institute. Quentin says, "It's a privilege to be associated among our many collaborations with Roald on this book, a landmark of both his concern for people and his passionate belief in the importance of reading." Today, these twin concerns continue to inspire the work of 2 Roald Dahl charities: Roald Dahl's Marvelous Children's Charity, which helps make life better for seriously ill children, and the Roald Dahl Museum and Story Center in Roald's hometown of Great Missenden, where reading and literature are celebrated. I already loved the man. I knew some of that about him, but that just makes me love him more, that, he was not only an author, but he championed the causes of literacy and celebrating reading, etc., and that he has the 2 charities that he worked with, the Dyslexia Institute. So a little bit more about why I love the Vicar of Nibbleswick. So he's diagnosed by the local doctor as having back to front dyslexia, which means that when he is preaching in his little parish, his brain automatically picks out the most important word in the sentence and he says it backwards. So he doesn't realize he's doing it, but he's horrifying his congregation. And my dad, as I've mentioned many times, was the K-12 librarian in my tiny little hometown, and he brought this book home because I don't know if he had some parents complain. It doesn't have bad words in it, but they come out as bad words. So he's talking about communion and how you shouldn't gulp the communion wine, you should sip the communion wine. But he says, instead of gulp, he says plug, because he reads it backwards. And instead of sip, he says piss. So you shouldn't plug the communion wine, you should piss the communion wine. Never plug. Piss, 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 he says. And see, I can't even talk about it without laughing. And people look at me like I'm crazy when I talk about this book. And you're probably looking at me like I'm crazy. You can't see me, but you're looking at the podcast like it's crazy. And then there's another part where he's talking about parking. But park comes out crap, K-R-A-P. Not a bad word, right? But you shouldn't crap on the side streets because it's unsightly, and so the local doctor does help him to find a way around this very interesting condition, so he's able to preach without horrifying his parishioners. But I loved this book. I have several friends who are Lutheran pastors, and when they graduated from seminary, I gave them this book as a graduation present because I love it. It's my all-time favorite Roald Dahl, and I love Roald Dahl beyond a lot. I love his other books, but it shows you that he had a very silly, very slightly twisted sense of humor, but he also had a passion for reading and literacy. And, he donated, or he auctioned all rights to this book to benefit the Dyslexia Institute. So Roald Dahl, I love you. I'm sad that you're no longer in the world, but I am very happy that your books will live on forever, and I can read them and read them and read them because they are truly wonderful. What is your favorite Roald Dahl book? You can tell me your favorite Roald Dahl movie, too, if you haven't read any of his books. But if you love some of those movies, you should definitely read the books because, of course, you always get more detail in a book than you do in the movie. Not dissing a movie, because I love me a good movie, but 99% of the time I do like the book better because you get more detail. I think I can think of 2 books that I've ever read in my entire life where I liked the movie better. Pretty crazy. But if you have seen, let's say, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Willy Wonka or Matilda or the BFG, what else? The Fantastic Mr. Fox, James and the Giant Peach. If you've seen any of those and you love them, but you haven't read Roald Dahl, well, you definitely need to. If you need more convincing, go to the website because you can see descriptions of the books. You can see illustrations by Quentin Blake, who illustrated Dahl's words so perfectly. Very quirky, very they're just perfect. They're slightly quirky, they're slightly silly, just like Dahl's writing. So they were the perfect combination, I think, for these books. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast as much as I have done. I've enjoyed talking to you in this podcast. Please find me on social media and tell me not only your favorite Roald Dahl books, but your favorite childhood authors, those people that you still gush over, that you still fangirl over. I would love to hear that. So hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram and tell me what your favorite Roald Dahl books are. And if you haven't read The Vicar of Nibbleswick, please do. Please go and giggle like I giggle whenever I don't even have to read the book. Just saying the phrase, the Vicar of Nimbleswick, and I will giggle for 10 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me. Please join me again on Thursday. I will be talking about, it's a childish week. I'm going to be talking about 2 children's books that I recently read as I'm catching up on some of my to-be-read list. So join me for that, and in the meantime, hope your week's going swimmingly and continues to do so. Go out there and get yourself lost in a good book, please.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.